workplace surveillance could mean that there's a shortage of the hottest new Christmas toy.
So as your employer spies on you, it's going to hurt your ability to buy your kids the toy they really want for Christmas.
Exactly. So workplace surveillance, anyone watching in the workplace, will mean that the hottest new Christmas toy will be in short supply. Let's get right to it. Welcome to the knock-on effect. This is where we start with the thing you know and end up in a strange place. I'm Justine Underhill, and joining us today is our eagle-eyed guesser, Alex Rosenberg.
Because?
And our prying professor joining us from an undisclosed location, Roger Hurst.
Hello, everybody, again.
All right, as always, the professor and I will guide you on this journey from workplace surveillance to the hot new Christmas toy.
All right.
But first, would you like to take a guess as to how these things relate?
Okay, well, it looks like, so there's some little holes in here, and I'm guessing that maybe this has like a tiny camera, and so this is a way to spy on your kids, and so it seems like a toy, but really it's a home surveillance. And so the same company that makes these spy eggs also makes the little things they keep in the workplace to spy on the workers. And so, yeah.
I mean, I will give you credit that toys are certainly getting creepier.
This is, no, these three little holes really put me off.
No, these are Hatchimals. This is the new, one of the hot toys of 2017, so last year's hot toy. I don't know. I don't know what this year's hot toy will be, but anyway,
okay.
These are not. I don't think they're spying
I thought
toys.
it was the specific toy. Okay,
No.
got it.
Let's begin at the beginning, and that involves workplace surveillance. Ooh, scary.
Okay.
But this is something that is sort of a natural phenomenon that you would expect to happen as technology advances.
Sure.
Employers want to know what their employees are doing, and so there's a lot more surveillance going on. At Amazon, for example, there are actually wristbands that they put on some of their employees to track their hand movements. This is in some of the warehouses and distribution centers to see, what they're actually doing.
Yeah.
Another example is that there are some companies, they've implemented software, and it takes screen grabs of an employee's computer screen, and it tracks what the employees are doing at different times, and then it gives them a focus score and an intensity score that it then sends to the employer.
Wow.
Pretty crazy. My favorite example is at another company, employees volunteered to get microchipped.
No.
This is true. This is absolutely true.
You don't want to do that.
This is Three Square Market, a Wisconsin tech company. So these employees can now enter the building. They can also log into their computers, and they can get actual chips from the vending machine. So the chips can get another chip, if you like.
So do they make these chips, this company?
That's a good question.
Got to.
I mean, yeah, so this
Who
is sort
else
of
would get that?
do that. Well, this is something that these employees have been very happy with. It's not something that I would ever consider doing.
Well, I learned recently, I thought you were just having these informal conversations every Monday morning. Turns out there are actually 3 cameras that are recording our every movement and 2 microphones that are watching every word. And even our conversation with the professor himself is monitored. Didn't you know that?
So in some ways, we are being surveilled.
We are. We're being surveilled right here.
This whole time. Yeah,
Shocking.
This is scary stuff.
Scary
well,
stuff.
The biggest surveillance, I mean, this is what gets us to a little bit farther in our journey, is electronic logging devices, ELDs. There's a new mandate basically put into effect in 2017, December, where truckers have to have their truck driving logs monitored. So it's something that's basically attached, a little electronic device attached to the engine. But to really get an understanding as to why this is upending the industry, we need to go back to the 1930s.
Wow.
Yeah, we're gonna go back a long ways. And then we'll get back to today, but don't worry about it. All right, Professor, can you take us on a journey? What was going on in the trucking industry in the 1930s?
Well, 1930s, I think it was 1935 to be precise. The federal government started kind of really regulating trucking. And I think this is the context of a deflationary period. And all these regulations were probably to create inflation. But the sort of things they did was limit the number of new entrants into the trucking industry. Companies had to come up with the rates they wanted for a certain journey. And if these rates were too low, then they could be rejected and replaced, obviously, with higher rates. And also, whilst companies were granted kind of authority to have specific routes across the country, if other companies or other truckers wanted to get onto those routes, they'd effectively had to buy them or bid for them. So these were all attempts to bring up inflation, but these became kind of enshrined in law and became locks in.
It was a heavily regulated industry, the trucking industry. What's so crazy is that, so let's say you were driving something from Portland to LA. You might actually not be able to transport goods from LA back to Portland because there were different locks on certain routes. You know, certain drivers or certain companies had ownership of a path or of a route. And so by the 1970s, people were buying these routes for hundreds of thousands of dollars.
God,
it
what a
created
bad
this
system.
crazy marketplace.
It just makes everything more expensive because
Oh, absolutely. Actually, it's interesting because here's another weird part of it. Only certain products were regulated this way. And so that would end up creating these huge imbalances in terms of pricing. So I have this rates for cooked poultry were 50% higher than rates for freshly dressed poultry. So why would that be? It's just because freshly dressed poultry didn't have to abide by these regulations in terms of route ownership. So yeah, kind of a bizarre system. But even with all these like bizarre regulations, and actually perhaps because of all these regulations, truck drivers were extraordinarily well paid. It was a very good blue collar job in the 1970s.
And it was also controlled by the mob, and to the extent it was like the last industry that was really controlled by the New York crime families, like such as the Gambino family, and it's probably because you had to grease the wheels, so to speak.
Well, also I just want to mention trash is still a mob industry.
Wherever there's regulation, there's mafia.
Yes,
that's
exactly.
That's my theory. That's my theory. That's why we always talk about we talked about the trash mafia, the cheese mafia.
Yeah.
You know, wherever there's
regulation,
things that are freely sold. You know, there's no Apple mafia that I know of.
Yes.
But like heroin, a lot
of
of organized crime around heroin.
As much as I love the mafia and I love talking about the mafia, we're not getting into that here.
Okay.
What actually happened was that the system soon came to an end in the 1980s. And that meant that these...
And then we had no great trucking movies. You know, we had all those Burt Reynolds movies in the 70s. There was the great, there's that movie, the Cannonball Run.
I don't know it.
Roger, trucking was of that, no?
Yeah, but Cannonball Run was a fast car movie, a bit like Gumball Rally. You're thinking of Convoy with Chris Christopherson. That was the big trucking movie.
Ah, yes.
Okay.
10-4.
Yeah, exactly. Rubber duck.
Well, Professor, perhaps you can tell us also what was going on in the 1980s besides with movies. What was the government doing?
Alex kind of nailed it earlier when he said, "Oh, prices are going up," and you had inflation basically. And although we always think of Reagan hitting and attacking inflation, it was President Carter in 1980 who signed the Motor Carrier Act, which removed a lot of these ridiculous regulations that had been in place since the deflation days of the 1930s. Most notably, it allowed new trucking companies to come up with new companies to start with relative ease. So you could start a new company yourself. And there's more control over charging rates. Presumably, you could undercut your competitors if you thought you'd get more volume. So a real deregulation started to come into force.
Okay, so deregulation, guess what happens?
Prices go down.
And there were a doubling of trucking firms from 1980 to 1990. We saw twice the number of firms. So it was basically this huge opening of the floodgates.
Wow.
And because of this explosion of firms, this also came along with something else. So Steve Viscelli, he's the author of the book, The Big Rig. He describes this new era as destructive competition. So competition so severe that it undermines profitability to the point that it causes underinvestment by firms, industry-wide inefficiency, market instability, and poor service quality. So Professor, can you tell us a little bit about what was happening here?
From 1980 to today, median trucking wages have fallen as much as 35% in some metropolitan areas. So deflation, as we all know, has returned.
But that's good, right? I mean, we're spending less on getting crap from one place to another. I mean, is that not a good thing? And what am I missing here?
It has a lot of knock-on effects.
All right,
we'll
okay.
get to. We will get there. Well, I also want to mention, just as a side note, so a lot of this deregulation and this plummeting in trucking costs is actually credited with the rise of
Diner coffee. Very good for coffee makers who are making coffee just in the middle of nowhere. Just a lot of trucks pull up. And you ever been to one of those trucker diner spots?
Those are certainly a lot more popular now. I'll get to
Yeah.
why that is.
Okay,
Also,
good.
trucker parking is a little bit more difficult now too,
okay.
which we will find out. But it also led to the rise of big box stores. And so like Walmart, it's credited with the rise of Walmart. It's credited with the rise of a lot of these major e-commerce companies and the downfall of a lot of these mom and pop shops.
Interesting.
Yeah. So you have a lot of people leaving the trucking industry, and that's created this huge shortage of truckers. And that's sort of where we have begin our story, because there's a huge shortage of truckers as we're seeing this big increase in online shopping. And so basically right now we have a shortage of 50,000 truckers, according to some estimates, and almost 1 million drivers will be needed to be hired in the next decade in order to keep up with demand. So that's sort of where we begin. And then on top of all that, we have these things called electronic logging devices. So this is really where surveillance comes in. So electronic logging devices, or ELDs, this mandate went into effect in December 2017, and the mandate basically requires that trucks log their hours, or truckers log their hours. And so they're allowed to drive for 11 hours a day, and they're allowed to stop for 3 hours to load and unload their goods. So maximum of 14 hours of work. Other than that, you have to be sleeping or doing something else.
Yeah.
Now, these hours of service have always been in effect, but they were using something like this. So this is a driver's daily log.
And nice.
So using something like this, I mean, one of these paper logs, I can draw on it, but it's pretty easy to fudge. I mean, you can change your hours a little bit, and people aren't really looking over them that carefully. So if you ever want to be a driver.
Oh, all right.
But you're not, in 2018, you wouldn't really be able to use that unless you're driving something like live
Yeah, in fact,
animals.
it says on the front, switch to J.J. Keller e-logs. Like, you're buying this product, and you're like, I don't buy this product.
Yeah, you're going to have to switch over. And so that's sort of been part of the difficulty, is that whereas drivers switching over to this electronic logging device system, these hours are really hard set, and they get transmitted back to authorities, and so everything, you're being watched all the time. And so the freedom that a lot of truckers had has now been taken away.
Well, you still get the open road in front of you. Nothing like an Arizona sunset, just that's all. I can't think of any truck terms.
Anyway, so basically the effect of moving from these logbooks to the electronic logging devices has meant that drivers have been basically forced to drive less. I mean, that's what we're seeing across the board. So on top of the fact that we're already seeing a driver shortage, on top of the fact that there's a huge surge in online shopping, we're now suddenly, as of this year, it started being enforced in April. So that was a pretty hard cutoff.
Really?
So, whereas other things have been, trends that have been growing, we saw a hard deadline here in April of this year that these ELD mandates started getting enforced. And so that sort of led to a whole bunch of knock-on effects that have happened very suddenly. So this leads to a barrage of knock-on effects.
All right.
Okay, so because many truckers are working less in accordance with the ELD mandate.
Because basically what you're saying is they weren't actually complying with the mandate. They were saying, oh yeah, I slept 10 hours, but really they didn't.
Exactly. And this leads to a whole bunch of concerns. I mean, for safety concerns, you don't want truckers driving, 20 hours a day.
No.
On the other hand, I've heard a lot of trucker accounts, and I'm very sympathetic to them. They want to have control over their schedule. There's mandated 30-minute breaks in certain periods of time, of driving time, and sometimes it just doesn't make sense. And so it's sort of putting this one-size-fits-all rule onto these truckers doesn't always work out quite the way you would imagine.
Do they always go solo, or do they sometimes roll with it?
There's actually a big trend in duo riding. So couples are now doing it. So one couple, a husband will drive for, this is a huge thing, will drive for 11 hours, and then the wife will then take over for the next 11 hours.
It says slow down, can you imagine?
Well, one's sleeping.
Your whole life is your
in the car.
spouse backseat driving you.
God. But one is sleeping while the other one's driving.
I hope so. Go back to sleep.
But this is actually a big trend that's been taking off. But then, of course, because many workers and many truckers are driving less, we've seen huge jumps in pay. So a lot of driver salaries are seeing unprecedented increases. Some drivers are reporting a 15% bump in pay in just the past few months, which is, nice little trucker inflation going on right there.
Yeah.
On top of this, so knock-on effect number 2, so almost every item you have is transported.
On a truck.
On a truck.
I know, that's one of those things I love. It's like all the food comes from farms. Everything you have came on a truck. It's like, I don't know, there's some romantic Americana
it is.
thing going on here, right? Do you guys have the same allure of truckers in old Blighty or whatever you call your home country, Roger?
It's not quite the romance, not quite the long distance driving that you guys have, because obviously, one end of the UK to the other is only about a day.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, fine.
How long does it take to cross the U.S.? A week?
Yeah, a week and a half if you go the wrong way. Take a couple wrong turns, you're talking about a year.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, it depends on your path. Well, so by revenue, trucks carry more than 82% of the items that are sold in the U.S. And so...
So not everything comes on a truck.
Most things come on a truck.
What doesn't come on a truck?
That's a good question. I was actually wondering that myself. But anyway, so it's now costing retailers 30% more to ship something. 30% more to send them by truck than it did in April of last year. So this is a huge increase, 1/3 increase in costs. So Professor, what are some of the numbers that we have here?
Well, in terms of companies, it's pretty much all of them. Guess the industry. Halliburton, so that's oil. PPG Industries, paint. International Paper speaks for itself. You've also got Coca-Cola, toy maker Hasbro, Procter & Gamble and Nestle all reporting that their freight costs are rising quite rapidly.
And these costs are, guess what, being passed along to consumers,
sure.
you and me.
Sure.
So General Mills has said that it's had to use more expensive on-demand shipping for some of its products because it just can't find enough people or companies to transport their goods. So they're using that shipping, and that costs as much as 60% more for certain goods. So that's created a huge problem for them. And so to compensate, General Mills is planning to raise prices on some products and sell some products in smaller packages, which is kind of an interesting way of going about it.
Were these regulations always a little overly onerous because we knew people would fudge them? And now that people have to adhere to them by the books, it's like a little ridiculous?
Well, I would say that it is a little onerous. I mean, at least just hearing from some of these truck drivers' accounts. But honestly, being on the road for 14 hours is just dangerous. Being awake and working for more than 14 hours each day is dangerous. And so
But people were doing it before.
Yeah.
I mean,
well, so there are studies that show it decreases like accidents and driver mortality rates and all sorts of other things. Yeah. And if someone's operating a huge truck, you want to make sure that they're getting enough sleep. Right. And so there are other devices. There are things actually that monitor your eyelids and how quickly you're blinking and stuff like that, just to see how alert you are. That would probably make more sense than saying you can't work for more than 11 hours and you have to do this and this and this, because guess what's happening? Drivers are speeding. They're speeding to try to get to places faster to get there within the 11-hour time frame that they have.
Now let me ask you another question on the other side of this. Aren't we gonna, let's be honest, and you know what I'm gonna say, aren't we gonna have automated truck driver? We're not really.
I knew you were going to bring this up.
Yes. So this is a temporary thing, right? Where people are paying truckers more, and these automated trucks, they don't have to sleep. They could just, right?
We do have.
So this increase in cost, isn't this like a weird blip in the midst of
downtrend? I do want to cite a study from researchers at UC Berkeley.
Big trucking mecca.
Yes,
Berkeley.
Exactly. Well, so they basically said that you're going to have this whole movement for autonomous driving, but that's going to be mostly long haul. Mm-hmm. And so those jobs are actually going to be shifted to city driving or smaller range driving. So they say, quote, many other freight moving jobs will be created in their place. So all the jobs lost will be created, perhaps even more than will be lost. But these new jobs will be local driving and last mile delivery jobs. And then they do say that that's a little bit concerning because those tend to be lower paying jobs.
Right, but in the long run, no pun intended, it's going to be cheaper to ship
to transport things.
Right.
You would think eventually. Yeah. But for now, these knock-on effects that are a little bit more near term than the long range one. Good. I want to get to another quick example of how this is all affecting your food as well and costs for your food. So Tyson Foods, which is the largest meat company in the US.
Yeah, they kill 25 billion chickens a year?
Something like that. Well, they're going to need to spend an additional $250 million. So they're going to spend an additional $250 million for shipping this year alone. That's according to the CEO. And he said that's going to be a cost that will be passed along to consumers. And I have a quote. He says, product prices must reflect the true cost because we cannot subsidize the increased freight. That's that makes sense. Now, speaking of increased freight, we get to knock-on effect number 3, which is Amazon. So Amazon is definitely going to be affected by all of this. So Amazon's own shipping costs jumped by 38% year over year.
Wow.
Which is kind of insane. I know they're not about being profitable, but that's a huge
But that's
increase.
costs overall, not as a percentage of revenue.
That's true.
It's partially because they're like killing it year after year and just shipping more things.
Yeah, that's true. So that is cost overall. Now, Amazon cited these increased shipping costs, though, as the reason for boosting the price of a Prime membership in April.
Interesting.
So this is something that they are having to deal with. The CFO of Amazon, he said, the value of Prime to customers has never been greater, and the cost is also high. As we pointed out, especially with shipping options and digital benefits, we continue to see rises in costs. So shipping has definitely been a major issue for them. And then we have our 4th knock-on effect. This is our grand finale. This will get us to toys. So this has a huge impact on warehousing. So warehousing is going to you want to try taking a guess?
Warehousing. So that's it sounds like where you keep a toy. Well, okay, so just in time I know has been there's been a lot of growth in just in time, and so maybe there's going to be less just in time and more let's just get it there and then we'll sell it rather than, let's take another crate of this toy. So maybe the most popular toys, if something really is a Tickle Me Elmo level hit, they're not going to get enough to the old store.
Exactly. So predictive filling is really important, especially around Christmas time, because it's better. I mean, if you're running a company, it's better to have excess of what you think might be in demand, just in case, because it's anything else. I mean, it'll get sold eventually. But a lot of what Amazon's doing and a lot of what other major retailers have been doing we'll try to open that up at the end.
Supposed to open up? What?
I don't know. We can try that at the end. I'm actually not sure how they open. But a lot of it's been reactive rather than proactive.
Yes.
And so that's sort of the huge issue here. And so for warehousing, because trucking costs have been so expensive, because it's actually hard to find truckers in the first place, they just have to keep in their warehouse what they need. And so they're not actually doing any sort of predictive filling. And so your Hatchimals or whatever else might be a little bit in shorter supply this year.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, but not Hatchimals, whatever the
this
big,
new.
What do you think the big hit toy of? You've children, Professor. What do you think is going to really take fire in a couple months?
Everyone seems to be into these things called LOLs and something Hashmis or Modjis or something. They're all kind of small, rubbery, little kind of bunny-looking creatures.
Oh, oops! Did I break this? I don't know if I broke it or.
Open it. I think that's right. What'd you get?
I got a
fuzzy.
Yeah. Sorry to interrupt you, Professor Oe. The one he's hatched.
That seems like a really tough child's product.
I guess, is it supposed to hatch on its own, maybe?
I don't know.
Oh! You don't have any Hatchimals, do you, Raj?
No, I don't think so, but things like that are very, very popular here as well. Just sort of small animals in things that you open up and it's a surprise.
Yeah, I think everyone likes surprise.
Nice, yeah.
Well, anyway, so I mean, to take this a step back, I mean, it's interesting to see how, whether it be security and tracking and all these things are going to start impacting our world in different ways. But then on top of that, we also in our society kind of take shipping for granted. I mean, you expect to have things for free. People won't even buy something if they're shipping on it.
Oh my God, $5 for shipping.
Right, exactly. And so that's where we don't actually realize the value of what we're getting. And so what we're gonna have to start coming to terms with at some point is that that's gonna have to be either baked into the cost or we're gonna have to start paying for shipping in some way or another.
But it's good for the truckers themselves. I mean, I was reading stories about a couple of years ago about how a lot of retirees are getting into trucking because they can throw on some opera, open road, cup of coffee. I don't know. Coffee just seems like an important part of trucking.
Yeah.
But it could be actually a nice, especially if you're allowed to sit 11 hours a day. We have a lot of people in the workforce who aren't working due to disability. Maybe we'll see more of them hit the road and go Burt Reynolds style.
There were studies done that those who are in the trucking industry are, I think 2/3 of them are obese. The food options are very poor, low quality. There's just a lot of health issues that come along with trucking. So your romantic idea of trucking is actually not as nice as it sounds.
Okay, I mean,
Yeah.
okay, they kind of put a damper on the romantic
Yeah,
notions of trucking,
not
I think.
as nice. All right, well, I think that does it for this week on the Knock-On Effect. You can catch the Knock-On Effect every Thursday at realvision.com/knockoneffect.
We also do a podcast version. Just head over to Real Vision Presents on your podcast app.
And when you go to Real Vision, you should make sure to sign up for your 14-day free trial if you haven't done so already. And now's the time to act, because guess what? There's a promotion going on with Business Insider where you get Business Insider Prime, which is worth $99 a year for free if you sign up for Real Vision now.
Good deal. I think that's it.
Yeah, all right. See you guys next week.
Keep on trucking. No, all right.
Open some of these.
All right, you want to open this? Let's see.
Oh.
No, that doesn't work. What do you
look
get?
how cute.
Oh, I like that one.
Look at this, I'm bleeding.
All right.